All right, ladies and gentlemen, level two, new venture creation. Right, guys, remember where we stopped yesterday, right? Yeah. So we said for you to be able to carry out a credible research, you need to have a research plan, right? So yesterday we started by identifying the various elements that constitute a research plan. Right. We say you must first of all identify the problems. Right? Identify what the problem is so that you can be able to do the correct the diagnostic that you need to do. Let's put it that way, or more simply. Oh, yeah. Then we said after that, you need to formulate a hypothesis, right? I explained to you yesterday what is involved in relation to the formulation of hypothesis. That is where you try to provide the initial explanation, right, of what the problem is. Then you need to look for how you need to collect your data, right? Guys, listen. Then you collect your data, you analyze. So in collecting your data, we are going to go into deeply now. I think even yesterday I explained this one to you, right? Whereby I explained to you that we have what we call primary data, right? Which are data gathered specifically for the research being conducted. It's original data that you went out to the field to obtain from the respondents or from your target group. Then we have, for you to be able to obtain this primary data, it can either be through surveys, right? Use questionnaires or interview, as they say in your book. Then you have the observation as well as the experiment. I explained this one yesterday. So, in terms of the secondary data, right? These are, remember I told you secondary data is data that have been collected from maybe for a different purpose perhaps, but not you that collected it, that went to the feed to collect the data. It has been collected already, right? Published perhaps. So we said already gathered in previous research project by other organizations, right? Which is well explained here. So where can you get those kind of secondary data from? Government publications, right? For example, it can be government gazette or policies or whatever. You can obtain secondary data from such yeah, sources. Then it could be statistics of Africa, whatever. It depends on what you are looking for. You can as well obtain secondary data from the libraries or resource centers, right? Then from university research papers, for example, dissertations, or whatever you may like to call it. Then from media statistics. For example, yesterday I showed you some of my publications, right? Some people, they do look at my publications and see what I've done. They do extract, collect information or data from my publication as well, as a kind of secondary source. Then we have news media or product survey, then professional business association, chambers of commerce, internet. You can as well get from the internet. Remember yesterday I explained to you Google Scholar, and I showed to you Google Scholar yesterday, right? There are a lot of credible sources that you can obtain academic journals from. For example, we got Scopus, right? So it's a lot of stuff. From now, we are from here, sorry to say, we're going to move on to the format of a questionnaire, right? If you want to obtain a primary data, remember what we said just now, that you can use a survey, right? Using a survey or going by a survey, you need to utilize a kind of instrument that we call a questionnaire, right? This is how a questionnaire look like. Your task revolves around this because I've got your task, right? You must make sure that you pay attention to what I'm teaching you now because that is what is going to help you to doing your task, right? Then this is how a questionnaire look like. I mean, customer satisfaction survey, right? This is the purpose of the survey. This person wants to establish the level of satisfaction of customers, perhaps relating to the product or the service, as the case may be, right? Section A questionnaire looks like this. It's divided into two sections, as you could see here, right? For most of you that haven't seen a questionnaire, this is how it looks like. This is a typical example of a questionnaire where you have section A, the demographic data, right? If you like, you can call it personal information, right? Age, income, right? Level, cell phone number. Some people don't really like to give some of this stuff, but it doesn't mean if you are dealing with a target group of which you don't need these things, all this demographic information in your analysis or in your in your research. So what you do is that it doesn't necessarily mean you have to add the whole of this stuff, right? Okay, it depends on the type of research you are doing, but obviously, in some instances, in many instances, let me put it that way, you have the demographic data. This is how you collect demographic data from the respondent or participant, as you would like to call it, if you will. So this is the demographic. You can call it personal information, right? Then this is the section that relates to the question that relate to what you are looking for specifically, right? For example, with a customer satisfaction survey, right? By the time you've obtained responses to these questions on analyze, it can help you to make an informed decision regarding this customer satisfaction, right? For example, queuing, right? You want to know, these are ratings. This thing is not designed properly. These are rating, right? For example, satisfied, right? This one could be, well, okay, dissatisfied, right? This one could be satisfied, right? Yeah, this one could be I don't know. So all what you do is you can put 1, 2, 3, 4. Then one it could represent something maybe satisfied or highly satisfied or highly dissatisfied, something of that nature. Have you seen something like this before? Okay. So staff friendliness, the same, they rate it. Then staff knowledge, they rate it. Problems resolved, they rate it. For example, now, right? If it is a rating of 1 to 4, right? All right. Or you discover if you say 4 is the highest, right? So if each of these ones they are putting 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, at the end of the day, it can quickly inform you that the customers are being satisfied. You understand what I mean? For example, so let's assume that from here you have 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. It means that they are not satisfied. So from here you can be able to make an informed decision in terms of friendliness. That means the staff are not friendly enough. Then you must look for a way of how to improve on that. That is the essence of doing a survey. Does it make sense to you? Yeah. Yeah. You design a program to improve on those areas, right? As far as this contest is concerned, does it make sense to you? So evaluating, analyzing. That what I've showed to you just now is the questionnaire, right? You need to administer it, distribute it to the target group, the respondent or the participant, if you will. Right? So now you need to collect it back if you are using manually. Right? If it is manually, if you are using manual process, you hand it out. Guys, sit down quietly. If it is a manual process, you need to go out there to distribute it. Right? You give them days. Remember what I showed to you now is just a typical example. It's not everything because when you are designing a questionnaire, first of all, there must be an introduction to explain to whosoever that is responding to your questionnaire what the purpose of the questionnaire. Because I wasn't saying a purpose there, although it's a customer survey, but that one is not explicit enough. Right. Then towards the end, you must be polite to tell somebody, thanks for your time. You must thank that person, right? All those closing remark, I'm not seeing it there, the one I showed to you just now. But when you are designing a questionnaire, you mustn't forget about the closing remark. I thank you for your time, right? You know, all those type of stuff, right? Then don't forget to, for example, if it is a manual stuff, if you are using the manual process, don't forget to put the time in which the questionnaires must be delivered to you, right? Even if it's not manual, in electronic form, don't forget to put there to indicate when you are expected to receive the questionnaire. Please, I would be, I would appreciate if you could respond to the questionnaire, right, on or before you put a date. Because when you give a questionnaire to somebody, if you don't put a date there, deadline, that person will, you can just leave it there, right? You must make sure that you set a deadline. You set a date, say, I need this questionnaire on or before a certain date. Do you understand? So that the person will work towards that. Does it make sense to you? Right. So now, when you've collated your responses, you see this guy now, he's looking at his computer, right? He's trying to evaluate and then analyze the data. Right. When you collected your data, you need to analyze it, right, before you can be able to make an informed decision. Because if you just see 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, it doesn't make sense. You must collect everything together for one to be able to understand. So the first step is edit the data, right? How do you edit the data? What are the things that you need to put into consideration in editing the data? For example, have all questions been answered? You see, there are people, they got the tendency of not answering the whole questions. Or perhaps if they don't know about it, what they would say, right? Some people will just leave it unanswered. So you must look at your question, the responses, and see if there were some questions that were unanswered. Does it make sense to you? Right. Can the answer be read? For example, you need to see if it is something that you can be able to read, if it is readable. Are the answers accurate? Right? You need to be able to look at that as well. It's very important that you check the accuracies of the answers. For example, there are certain people, when you give them questionnaires, instead of them to tell you that they don't have time, right? They just start ticking like this. Then they give to you. They keep it for you. There are people like that. They don't read. They just put numbers, just to give to you to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do without doing it properly. Right? They will just do that to please you. So you must check for that. Do you understand what I mean? Because when you use that one to make an informed decision, at the end of the day, you're gonna be in a mess because that person didn't even care to read. Does it make sense to you? Right. Then, are the answers accurate? As I've said, do the answer make sense? Right? You need to look at it to see whether the responses are making sense. Do you understand? For example, somebody can tell you, let me give you an example here. Let's go back. You see this one, right? Okay. For example, if somebody says staff knowledge, right? Staff knowledge. Okay. For example, if you have a question like this, staff knowledge in